who got this lathe, you said, from Follinsby, Peter?
I've made a bunch myself, but this one I inherited.
Okay, very nice. So he does a lot of this for a living, gives classes and goes around hauling several of these to people's places and stuff. So we're privileged to have him with us today.
Thanks.
Not only to show us how this spiffy thing works and how to save electricity, but he's got some interesting
And get a workout.
turning techniques, some of which can only be done on here.
Yeah.
So, with that,
Awesome.
I'd like to turn
Thank
it
you.
over to Pete.
All right,
Thank
awesome.
you for being with us.
I'll just sit on the stool for a little bit and chat. So thanks for coming out today. I really appreciate it. And thanks to Claude for inviting me. You know, I went before the jury for the guild, for the league. I guess that was last year sometime. And I was actually really worried because the type of woodworking that I do, the turning that I do, is a little out of the norm. And I wasn't sure how the jury was really going to see my work. And I was not optimistic at all. And Claude was super supportive, just great. So, you know, thanks for that, because I was pretty sure I was going to fall flat in my face in that meeting. So, so my name's Eric Goodson. I am a woodworker from northern Massachusetts. I live in Newbury right now. And I teach in the Boston area, and I also teach just down the road at Sanborn Mills Farm. I occasionally teach in North Carolina at a green woodworking festival there, which is great. And then I produce product for sale at markets and online and stuff like that. So how I got into this, I'm actually a recovering history teacher after COVID. I spent almost 30 years in the classroom teaching US history and other subjects. And on the weekends and vacations, I would spend my time doing craft. And what I really got excited about initially was something probably closer to what you do. I thought these beautiful machines, and I can make furniture for my family and things like that. And then the expense and the dust and the danger of it all kind of sunk in. And I really got turned off pretty early on in my woodworking journey to woodworking, because it just seemed overwrought. And but because of the history stuff that I was doing in Massachusetts, I'd take my students to Plymouth Plantation every year, and there I met Peter Follinsby. Peter Follinsby was for many years the joiner for the plantation. In fact, just about every stick of furniture in the place is made by Peter. And I'd basically send my students off to do their projects, and I'd just sit at his display and just watch Peter work and think, this is what I really want to be able to do. The amount of, the beauty of the work he was producing with just hand tools just sort of blew me away. He did have a lathe similar to this set up, but he was using it for spindle turning for chair parts and things like that. And the setup is different. I can walk through what the differences are between spindle turning and bowl turning on a lathe like this. But then I saw a video online by a guy named Robin Wood, who actually wrote this book. This is the only book on this crazy thing that we do. And this 7-minute video introduced me to this world of pole lathe turning. And the combination of those two really got me excited about green woodwork. And so I kind of went down the rabbit hole of green woodworking, really focusing on hand tool use, really focusing on using green wood for its workability, and taking advantage of the way that wood dries to impart a certain quality to your product. I know, now that I turn mostly on an electric lathe these days, I know within the electric lathe world, there's a lot of emphasis on using stable dry material, twice turned stuff. But because I'm coming out of this pole lathe experience, I'm emphasizing a lot of, I only turn green now. I only once turn. I occasionally sand. For the most part, I am embracing tool marks, because that's kind of where I'm coming from for the last 12 years or so. And so, the type of things that I'm really interested in is I'm inspired a lot by historical examples coming out of Northern and Western Europe, where these sorts of lathes were used, of wooden craft that was used every day. So I'm really interested in Scandinavian ale bowls, winged bowls like porringers, like this, or snibskal, which are four-eared bowls, cups, and I do a lot of carved spoons. I teach a lot of spoon carving as well. And that's the kind of the tradition that I'm coming from, and that while I'm doing a lot of it on the electric lathe now, for many years I did it on the pole lathe. But I just can't production turn on a pole lathe. I mean, I know Robin Wood did it for years, and many people have tried to, but honestly, I can get through maybe 4 bowls in a day before I'm exhausted, so.
Well,
Yeah.
look how shape you are.
Actually, it's funny. I was talking to a student of mine the other day. She had an Apple Watch on, one of these ones that watches your steps.
Ring was looping.
And she came in the next day after her first day in class, and she said, "Eric, my watch is off." I said, "What do you mean your watch is off?" "Well, I walked home last night, and I thought I should have had 7 miles yesterday, but it was reading something closer to 13. So it's actually, when I teach like this, I actually have to explain to people this demands a certain amount of stamina and coordination. You have to be able to walk, I would say, at least 3 to 5 miles without, in a day. And you have to be able to stand on one foot and jump around. That said, like a week ago at Sanborn Mills, I taught a class, and I had my oldest student, 79 years old, came out and busted out a bowl. So I don't think it's beyond, many of us. So. The green woodworking sort of world that I'm coming from is embracing the fact that because we're green working, we really can't scrape, we really don't sand a whole lot. The wood doesn't kind of hold up for that. I could hit it again afterwards once it's really dried, but the drying process takes me a couple of weeks. And I have to dry things very slowly to make sure they're not going to crack. And coming off the pole lathe, because my revolutions per minute are something like 200, 250, it's going to produce tool marks, but a very sharp tool that that's used skillfully and slice as well, I think produces a very clean finish. And so one of the things that I'm doing a lot of is I'm using milk paint, and that actually will accentuate, especially on a pole lathe turn piece, the tightly grouped turning marks. And even when I'm turning on an electric lathe, I am not sanding my marks away. I'm very much leaving them. I'm not trying to obliterate. I really want the shape to be left behind. So green wood turn, very ovalized. This is one that I turned at a demo not too long ago. That's unoiled and sort of straight off the lathe. That's sort of the finish that you'll get with really no sanding. And then there are other things that I think green woodworking, green wood turning, I think really is, great for. So these are locking lidded boxes. This comes out of the Scandinavian tradition, largely in Sweden and Norway. These boxes are a little bit of green wood magic. So this is a radial blank. And because I don't want a tangential blank because it will cause cupping, and the lid won't sit right? But if I take a radial blank, that plane will be relatively flat when it dries. It will still ovalize, but it will not cup in this plane. And what happens is you turn this green, and then literally the next day, and when you're done, you'll pop your top on and it will spin. It'll just spin all the way around. And then the next day you'll come back, and because it's ovalized, it will then cam shut. Does that make sense? It's those sorts of projects that I've been sort of fascinated by coming out of this green woodworking tradition. I even brought, when I turned this Thursday, I was hoping it would not dry, and I could actually show you it's spinning. But I came down the next morning and it had already dried just enough to ovalize. So. Yeah, no spin. So this will take still another 2 weeks to dry, but we use these in our house as salt cellars and sugar and stuff like that. So, any questions so far? Yeah.
How long do you ride before you cut it. Like you said, you were doing it green.
Yeah, yeah.
And you cut your stock ahead.
So I leave my stuff in long lengths.
Yeah, a dozen pieces or whatever ahead of you.
Yeah, I leave my stuff in long lengths in my yard, and then when I'm ready, I'll pick a log. I'll dimension pretty much all of it. I take off 2 inches off an end to get away from the checks. And then I'll dimension everything depending on what I want to make, and then I put them in large Rubbermaid totes and keep them moist, and then I just work on that stuff. When we say green wood, I think that's really a misnomer. It is not dead green. Dead green wood will turn fuzzy, even if you're turning on an electric lathe. And so you can leave them to mellow, I'd say up to a year, depending upon the species. Obviously, birch is gonna go punky really fast, but beech, it's wonderful after a year on the ground as in a log. You might get some spalting, but yeah, so I'll dimension small chunks at a time, work through that batch, and then go back out. I just leave it covered with a tarp. I don't worry about painting the ends of my logs or anything like that. Okay. All right, so a reciprocating lathe like this, so this particular lathe is a travel lathe. This is what's called a Viking style lathe. Relatively easy to break down, relatively light to move. The ones that I did more of my turning on that are kind of permanent in my shop are far more substantial than this. And that's helpful for turning larger pieces, just to cut down on the vibration. So a lot of what I have is just made out of old barn beams, basically, with threaded rod and barn beams just sort of locked together. This style of turning pretty much died out by about the mid-20th century. Robin Wood, in his book here, The Wooden Bowl, talks about the last bowl turner in England, a guy named George Lely, who really turned his last bowl in the 1950s. But he was turning from a tradition that had been very common throughout Scandinavia, Northwestern Europe, and Central Europe. And there's actually quite a resurgence since Robin Wood tried to resuscitate this. He saw George Lely's lathe and tools in a museum, and he said, why is no one doing this? And he began to try to do it himself. And really from Robin, a larger sort of movement has been to resuscitate pole lathe turning, because it is a wonderful way to turn. It is so, you have so much control. Like, if I want to speed up, I speed up. And if I need to slow down and really hog material, I can provide more torque, right? The amount of control that I've got over that, or if I'm getting a vibration at one particular revolution, I can just speed things up a little bit and the vibration will go away for me, right? If I get out of that resonant frequency. So there's just a tremendous amount of control. You can also do things on it that you just can't do on a regular lathe. You could turn a handled cup. This handle is not glued on here. It's been turned on little revolutions. It's a pain in the ass, and I don't like making these. I did not make this one. It's a total pain in the ass, but you can do it. So, so basically, these particular lathes are relatively sort of, as you put it, easy to put together, relatively unstable. But once I lock everything into position, this rectangle here will be locked down, and pretty much everything in here is not going to be moving except for the spinning bit. And even if there's a lot going on elsewhere, once that's locked in, it's relatively stable. In addition, these centers, we're always so sort of focused, I think, on electric lathe turning or machining, on having all your centers line up. But these poppets really don't line up perfectly. And as long as they're pretty close, you're fine, because it's always a straight line between your two centers. Like, whether they're pointing at each other or not, that's still a straight line. You do run into a problem if they're a little bit off, with one of your poppets burrowing into your bowl blank a little bit and widening it, and therefore loosening the junction. So you'll find as I get started, I'll have to tighten it up for about the first 10, 15 minutes, and then it will pretty much come together. The way that we're going to attach a bowl blank, so I chainsawed this out and then axed it a little bit this morning just to make it bullish. is we need a mandrel. The mandrel is what is going to allow us to wrap around this drive cord and get it to spin. Mandrel sizes vary widely, and that's because you're really having to think about gearing, okay? So you generally want a mandrel to be about 25 or maybe 30% of the diameter. The diameter of the mandrel should be about 25 or 30% of the diameter of the bowl that you're turning. That will give you kind of a sweet spot in terms of both speed and torque. If you have a lot of speed, that is, every time you press down on the treadle, you get a lot of revolutions, that's lovely, especially for producing a fine finish, but sometimes you need torque in order to get through the material. As you get better and better, people tend to use smaller and smaller mandrels. In addition, though, if you're turning a large bowl, you're gonna need a mandrel of this size. So this mandrel probably was the one I used to turn this big bowl, a 12-inch, right? How you attach your mandrel to your workpiece there's sort of two ways to do it. The classic way is with tines like this, which you simply drive into the bowl blank. Another way that's great is with a tenon. The tenon one is the one that I use with students the most. See, what can happen is, as they're getting used to the turning kind of process, they can try to take too aggressive a cut too early. And when that happens, the whole piece bogs down and you get a catch. And when it catches, it can actually knock a mandrel off kilter if you use tines like this. And you can bang it in maybe once, but after that, you're kind of screwed because it'll always want to loosen up a little bit. The tenon mandrels, that never happens. So for beginners, tenon mandrels are definitely the way to go. But the disadvantage is, and this is actually a tine mandrel, if you're turning a nested bowl, right? I've got tools that will allow you. So this particular hook is actually designed for nesting so that I can actually come into a bowl blank and core it like this and leave a large enough core that I'll then turn another bowl out of, right? But when I do that, that blank is now a smaller diameter. So what I need to do is when I have finished that outer bowl, you'll snap it off. Then with the blank that you're left with, you have to put on a different diameter mandrel because the gearing has changed, right? That's the advantage of using tines instead of using a tenon. Does that make sense? So there are advantages to using tines, but generally I'll use tenon mandrels. So the hooks that I'm going to use today are what are traditionally used on this sort of lathe. Relatively easy to make as far as blacksmithing projects go. And they feel very foreign to folks that are used to bowl gouges at first. There is a cutting edge on the side that's facing you all and a dull edge on the side. You can make double-sided ones, which I have, which are very useful. Generally, you'll present the tool like this to the workpiece. Now, when you think about your bowl gouge that you're probably used to, right? You've got a parabolic bowl gouge like this. You're cutting with this right hand, my right hand, your left hand side there. This little edge is that cutting edge. Imagine this is basically a bowl gouge with the other side missing. So when you kind of think about its use, that's kind of where it fits with maybe something you're already kind of used to. Okay? And they make these in all different sizes for all different uses. You know, I've got some here that are used more for end grain turning. No, where do you get these, right? If you don't make them yourself, there are a few folks in the United States that make them. But generally, folks will make them themselves. There's a big Scandinavian immigrant community in the Midwest, so places like Michigan, Wisconsin, this is pretty big out there, and there's a turner out there named Jared Dahl who does sell these tools. He'll run batches occasionally, but for the most part, people will make them. I don't run across many people in this area that know how to do this. I mean, what I learned pretty much by making lots of mistakes in my basement and swearing a lot. I did find one other person that was doing it, my friend Oliver. He lives in Mid-Coast, Maine now, and we would spend afternoons turning together and comparing notes and trying to figure out how to do certain cuts like that. Just as a point of reference, this was my very first bowl that I produced in my basement. It was incredibly challenging, but it was a bowl and I was excited, so. All right, any questions before I get going here?
Why the hook and what kind of angles are you looking for?
Oh, what kind of angles? This is all very imprecise, and you'll make a batch of these and find hooks that are good for different things. I'd say the edge angle is probably on the order of maybe 23, 24, 25 degrees. And the hook is simply the way it's traditionally been done. I can do some of these cuts with a bowl gouge, but you'll see, I'll talk through it. Many times I'm working below center. So one of the things that is going to surprise you is how far below center I'm actually working. I'll work, like if the bowl face is a clock face, 6 o'clock is down and 12 o'clock is up, I'm generally working at about 7 o'clock, really far below center. When I'm on the inside of the bowl, like if I'm on an electric lathe,
Does that give you greater range of motion?
it allows me to sweep. I can bring the tool up and twist it. That creates these curved forms. But when I think about my electric lathe turning and I'm on the inside of the bowl, I'll often do a push cut that will rise and then fall toward the center. I'm doing exactly the opposite when I'm on a pole lathe. I'm actually starting at the bottom and then rising. So you'll see me kind of do it. Yeah, so teaching folks that have a little bit of electric lathe experience sometimes helps me translate what's going on. But I don't have a necessarily good answer to that great question. Why these? Why this method? I think these were really easy to produce. You could produce them relatively rapidly. You can change the tool geometry very quickly. Just go over to your forge and heat it up a little bit and bend it around. So.
Carbon steel?
Yeah, what kind of steel? Yeah, mine are made with 01. Yeah, and generally, blacksmiths would probably shake their heads at the metallurgy that I'm actually trying to, like for example, I really don't quench. I don't quench in oil, I don't quench in water. I'm literally just resting the 01 tool steel on the anvil, and the anvil is just pulling the heat out, and that's that. And then I'll temper it in the oven like baking bread, and it's done. It's a relatively crude and easy tool to make.
So you're using these on an electric wood lathe?
No, absolutely not. There's too much torque, too much speed, and if you got a catch, they'd snap.
You're sweeping you said with
Only on these, I'm working below center and rising. I wouldn't, you can do it. You could certainly use these tools on an electric lathe. You totally could. But the danger of, because they're relatively fragile, because I'm only achieving like 250 revolutions per minute tops on this. It's low speed, low torque. Yeah.
Could you turn your electric lathe down and do?
Yes, you certainly could. But even then, the torque is, I can change my torque in a heartbeat just by not pressing. If I get myself into trouble on an electric lathe, I'd definitely wear a face mask using one of these on electric lathe. Yeah. But I've seen people do it almost as a party trick. It just seems dangerous to me. Yeah. So. All right, so what I'm going to do is just get one of these mounted up. Yeah, so all I've really done here is I found my center. I've made a little circle where I think generally this is going to line up. I'll use something with tines today. Just easier because I don't have to pull up my drill. I actually brought a drill, and many times I'll use a drill, but just for today I'll just do this. I'm going to line up the tines actually not going with the grain, but at a slight angle off the grain. There is a chance that the tines could split the blank if you lined it up with the grain. Good enough. So when you mount this, you're really going to put the drive cord between yourself and the mandrel. By the way, these drive cords, if you're ever interested, this is a chainsaw pull cord. Tends to last the longest. It does glaze a little bit after a while, so you have to kind of watch out for that, but it definitely is better than nylon cord or paracord or any of those. You definitely don't want stretch, and you definitely want something that's tough. I've seen some people use old ribbons of conveyor belt material. That seems to last really well, but.
What was chainsaw something? What was that?
Pull cord. You know when you're starting up your chainsaw and you yank on that, or like any pull device, actually. Getting ahead of myself here. So my first step is I really want to figure out where this is going to sit in sort of a balanced way on this. Actually, I'm realizing I got a little bit of crown here. I'm just going to take that off. I like a flat surface that the center can kind of get into here. I'll do. And what I'm looking for is to see if my mandrel is jumping up and down. I really don't care what's going on with the bowl blank, but I don't want the mandrel moving up and down too much. So right now, I've got a high spot right there and a low spot right there. So I'll just adjust this. Yeah, I like that. I'll take it. Then I'm just going to knock that in just to create a little kind of spot for myself. And I'll break up those fibers just by widening it just a little bit, very gently with just a Sloyd knife. Don't do this too hard, you'll break off the tip of your knife. Don't ask me how I know that. Then 3-4 wraps. Wind it down. Get your center where it should be. Got a little bit of play here. As you can see, it's moving just a little bit right there. So I definitely need to tighten this up just a little bit more. Everything seems to be running pretty smooth. Got a little bit of looseness here that I can kind of see. That's better. Yep, that looks good. There are a couple ways that you can hold the tool. Some give, basically it's a trade-off between control and stability. So for the least amount of control, or the least amount of stability, but the greatest amount of control, you can sort of hold it like this. A nice a compromise is to hold it like a baby. And then when I really want a lot of control or stability over this, I can tuck it under my arm. I lose a little bit of the range of motion, but it does allow me a little bit more, especially in under torquey circumstances, I might do this. So my first step is to try to basically take off the high spots and kind of make this round. Generally what I'm going to do is I'm going to start at the base here and try to create a single circle going all the way around that almost becomes my reference plane. Once I have complete contact all the way around and I know that circle is flat and axis with what I'm spinning here, I then will sweep off from that circle into the peaks and valleys of the wood that's just next to it. And I'll basically pull that reference plane all the way around. So this particular tool, by the way, is double-sided. It's sharp on both sides, so I can use it either tip up or tip down. I'm gonna use it tip down now because that gives me some advantages. Like that. The reason, by the way, that I used it tip down now is if I get a catch, it will spin away from me when it's tipped down. It'll just push out of the way. Tip up, you don't have as much ability there. But you can see I've got a little valley right there. I'm pretty close to having something that goes all the way around. Yep, there we go. So now I've got that reference plane, and this is what I'm basically going to work off of from here. And I'm just going to be sweeping off over the peaks and the valleys and eventually making this whole thing round. So give me 5 minutes here and we'll see if we can get this thing kind of sorted out.
What is that?
This is beech. The woods that I teach with, I generally teach with birch. It's probably easiest for beginners to get through. It's a relatively soft hardwood. It doesn't finish super well. Beech leaves a really nice finish for this type of turning. I do like the way it turns, but it's much harder, which is why I chose a 6-inch bowl rather than something a little bit bigger for you folks, because I just don't want to jump up and down all that long. So. And as we get used to this, you can see a little bit of play has opened up here. So I'm going to pause and just try to snug this up just a little bit. Yep. A little valley right there. So I'm going to back up behind that valley and then come into it. I'm actually going to shift tools here. Yep, loosen up just a little bit. It takes about 15 minutes or so for everything to kind of settle down. So I'm about, I don't know, halfway there, a little bit less.
This is so crude compared to what we're used to. Oh my God.
Which is sort of fun, right? It doesn't have to be precision all the time. But what I hope is that I can convince you that there's great precision that's possible. Like with those locking lidded boxes, you got to have a lot of control to be able to get that locking mechanism to work just right.
Hey, Bill, you'd be the perfect person for this athletic community. 9 days.
Part of my problem is I actually had knee surgery a few years ago on my knee, which means like the idea of doing a demo at Sunapee, doing this like every day for 9 days. No way. No way.
Are you doing pole stuff, pole lathe at Sanborn?
Yeah. Yeah, I just did a class a couple weeks ago, I think it was.
That's
And I also teach at North Bennett Street.
yeah.
You'll notice my left knee, the one I had surgery on, is getting tired now. The treadle allows me to stand on both sides. There's a lot of other ways that you could set up this treadle, but I love this design because I can actually I can pump with either leg, which takes a little bit of practice, but I think for the longevity of it all, it's really important.
What's the wood of the treadle?
What's the what?
What's the treadle made of? What wood?
Just dimensional pine.
Really?
Yeah, just this.
You ever snap one?
The treadle itself is rived. That's the only way I can make this strong enough and light enough. So it's a rived piece of hardwood. The rest of it is just dimensional lumber. Yeah, I break these all the time. In fact, in the back of my truck, there's another lathe. Because things go sideways sometimes with these. Obviously, it's a very crude construction. Obviously, the hardest part now is I'm hitting like straight on the end grain. So easily the hardest part is coming around this last little bit. So I've got a few sections here that I need to get behind. So I'll start back above those, take a few more passes, and then the bowl will be balanced.
A whip, do you ever come in from the outside in?
Yeah, yeah. You have to turn lefty and flip the hook upside down. You'll see me do it. Close. One thing I forgot to mention, dimensioning these blanks in sort of a more traditional way, because I'm turning green wood I definitely need to get away from the pith, obviously. 3 or 4, 5 growth rings, I think are good. But even with that, you'll still get quite a bit of cupping. If you don't want your cupping, either turn radial, or I'd go a good inch away from the pith, like get way back from the pith. And then you'll get, so this is electric lathe turned, but it's green, and this one has almost no cupping. That was just very far. I had ring shake in this particular piece of maple, so I had to work way far away from the center, which allowed a very stable tangential blank, and you got almost no cupping. Still ovalization, really just a bit. Compared to some of those, it's like night and day. All right, a few more passes, and then we can start some design choices. All right. So I'm gonna do what we were just talking about now. I'm gonna flip the tool upside down and come at it from the opposite side. I just want to resolve what is my upper limit gonna be here. And when Jared Dahl taught me this, my head almost exploded. He said, just turn it upside down and go lefty. And it just adjusted my whole worldview. So how are we doing here? So that's my low spot right there. So my rim certainly can't go higher than that. A little bit of an axe mark, but I think that's going to go away with the final pass, the final turning. Yeah, all right. Yeah, so I'm basically gonna stop with the rounding part of it, and now I get to think about design, whatever designs you sort of want to do on this. That little bowl that might be in the back for a second, that's a Scandinavian style ale bowl. They have a long tradition of drinking from bowls, and so, thank you. So that collar serves a real purpose. You register your finger on that as you bring it to your lips. Many times it'll have a slight return on the lid just to keep the liquids in there. Generally, they're much bigger than this. Yeah. And they're meant for celebrations for passing, which is why often you'll have handled bowls like this, or even snib skull, which are 4-handled bowls like that. A lot of traditions drink from bowls. The Scottish tradition, this is an electric lathe turned. The Scottish tradition, many times in weddings, uses quaich, which are small 2-handled bowls for drinking whiskey as part of your wedding ceremony, where you hand your partner the drink after you've taken from it. But for like home use, these are great for sides. Like this is really meant as a chowder bowl. It's got a nice return on it. I love handled bowls. I'm all about handled bowls. So.
You using coping saw for all the cutouts?
No, I use an axe and a Sloyd knife.
To do the cutout on?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
And a Sloyd knife. So because I'm coming out of that green woodworking tradition, one of the things I do a lot of is I carve spoons. And a knife like that, this one actually quite old. It's been sharpened so much it's kind of lost its profile, but it's got a slight distal taper. It's got a nice little radius to it. It allows for big slicing cuts because of that radius. Yeah, so all the detail work that I do in any of these handled bowls is done with this. An axe, though, is kind of alarming. I got to, like, you can imagine, like you spend some time turning this, and then basically I put it on the chopping block with that axe, and I'm like, and you just take off that side, just be bold.
Yeah, okay, so you're using the grain to work with your too.
Yeah, I will split off the grain, and then, I mean, I could go into how to use an axe like this. Like, this is a very heavy axe. This is just over 2 pounds. Great for dimensioning bowls. It's got a lot of weight for dimensioning bowls. But for delicate work, I'd probably use something like 1.2, 1.5 pounds. But, you know, an axe like this has this taper so that this radius, so that as you're flicking your wrist, you don't push an axe, you flick it, and that slicing action is very effective, right? Whenever using a knife or an axe, you just want to think about slicing. That is, skewing the blade to the surface like a plane, right? Or draw knife, we're always skewing that blade. And then you also want to be drawing the blade across the surface. So not just angling it to the surface, but drawing it, pulling it across this. Like, this will not cut me. That will, right?
Yeah.
Keep that in mind as you're working with axes and knives, and you become much more efficient, much more powerful. But an axe like this, you can get a lot of power down here. You can get a ton of control by getting your fingers right back up behind it. And if I really want control, I can even lay my index finger across that and do very delicate work with even a 2-pound axe like this, like making those sorts of bowls. So. All right, I should turn. So first thing I got to kind of think about here is this tailstock, what we call a poppet, is obviously driven into the workpiece. So I need to create kind of a little nub that's going to be removed later, sacrificial kind of pillar. And I need to get down probably about a 1/2 inch. So my first step is going to be burrowing in and creating kind of a pillar here that's going to be removed later. Then I'll think about the foot. Then I'll think about the sweep of the outside of the bowl, and I'll finish off the rim maybe with a little rim, a little bit of return. Once that's done, flip it around, do the inside, and we'll have a bowl. So my first step is going to be kind of a plunging cut. Now, Claude, I don't know if you can see, or if you guys can see, can you see how I'm very slightly pulsing my tool? I'm not just leaving it, I'm actually very slightly bringing it in and pulling it back with each treadle. And that will minimize the possibility of me catching as I take what is effectively a pretty aggressive cut. All right, so there's my nub. We'll axe that away later. It's actually a little bit bigger than I need it. I don't need it to be quite that large a diameter. I may take that down just a sec, just a little. Okay, that's good. Now, because as I've presented this tool, this middle of the hook right here has been doing a cutting motion, a slicing motion, but the bottom of that hook has been rubbing against this base and has produced a terrible rough surface there. So I've been slicing on the nub, but really scraping on the base. I now need to clean up the base. To do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to work down at 7 o'clock, And I'm going to register my bevel against the very edge of this little pocket that I've created. If I start off in space, it'll get caught and I'll get a catch. But if I register my bevel right there, it'll be supported enough for me then to sweep up and do a cleaning cut off that scraped surface. So this rising cut looks like this. And then I have to stop before I hit that nub. Because if I hit that nub, I'm to catch, right? Let me get a slightly different tool for this. Yeah, this will work a little better. And now I've got a relatively smooth surface right here, except for the very rim, which is still badly broken up, but I'm gonna come back and clean that up with a different cut. But now my bottom is pretty well sorted out. I'll take away a little bit of that business right there. Pull that down, pull that up a little bit. All right, so now I've got that bottom sort of cleaned out. Obviously, we want it, because we're dealing with green wood, we have to have a foot that is concave so that it sits on a table. My next step is to resolve this little outside broken up bit here, and I'm gonna come in just like that and take that down. Again, pulsing, because here I have no bevel support until I get a ledge created. All right, so you're gonna see me not sharpen today because I forgot my sharpening setup. I'm just gonna go from one tool to the next to find something sharp. But often, every like 15 minutes, just almost as much as I'm doing on an electric lathe, and I've got fewer revolutions. It's softer steel.
Using hone or?
Yeah, I wish I'd brought it for you guys. I'm sorry I forgot it. Serrated knives, when you sharpen serrated knives, you can get from like Spyderco or Diacomp these cone files, long, thin cone files that fold into their own handle. That's what I use. I find they're fine, they're reds, work great. Greens, very fine, probably finer than a rough tool like this really needs to be. The coarses work okay, certainly, but like when I teach a class and every student has used 3 tools and I probably had to sharpen them, when the class is done, the trick I've found, Dremel tool with a little cone sharpening bit on it. This is super Jim Jam. This will straighten out your tool in a heartbeat, which is great. So I may actually end up resorting to this because it's the only sharpening device I've got today. Chainsaw files work pretty well actually for dimensioning. Yeah, if you're making a tool and you have to hit that final kind of shape, they're pretty good. All right, so what I like to do, I'm gonna make an undercut base. This base is kind of flaring outward right now. I'd like to undercut it. So I'm gonna pull away a little bit of this material on the outside just to give myself a little bit of room. It's gonna have to go away soon anyway. And then I'm going to work at about this angle. And once I get something started, there it is. I tore up my rim just a little bit, so I have to go back and hit that again. Keep my speed up. Yep, that looks fine. I'll take care of that. I'll take that. All right, now I'm gonna do my final passes around, I'm actually gonna cheat, just do it now, around the outside. It's not a bad idea just to sharpen up your tools. Generally when I sharpen, what I'm doing is I'm trying to create a burr in the backside. And once I feel that burr, if I had a sharpening stone, I would just slip it around the back and take off that burr, and then I know that I'm sharp up to the edge. So generally, when you're doing your cuts, you basically lock this tool down to your tool rest, and then I am pivoting in basically creating kind of a cove. But because you want the outside not to be convex, but concave, but convex, I have to move around, which means that on a pole lathe turn piece, your cuts come in clusters, like maybe about a centimeter long kind of band that'll be all done at once, and then you very slightly have to move your left hand and a new band begins. So one of the things you're gonna see on a pole lathe turn piece is if it's done well, you'll see very tightly and precisely done kind of facets almost. I'm trying to keep the speed relatively high now to get the best surface I can with green wood at a relatively low speed. And I'm producing pretty fine shavings. This isn't a super sharp tool, but it's okay.
You're so far below center that I have a hard time getting it on camera.
Yes. And when I get in the inside, you're totally screwed because I'm going to be really low. And you can see how I'm kind of rising and twisting the tool to create that curve. All right, so there's my final surface. I don't want to create a heavy collar. I might actually do kind of a ale bowl collar. So I'm gonna cut in and kind of sweep in a little bit here. So I'll leave a slight collar. Start a new cut. All right. Any questions while I take a little rest and flip this around? I get about 2.5 revolutions every time I tread on the treadle, and that's when I take my cut. Some of you are asking about other style lathes that work under similar principles. Obviously bow lathes, which you might see today in North Africa where they turn chess pieces on a bow lathe. They literally sit themselves in the ground. Their left hand is doing a bow across a mandrel. The right hand is holding their tool, and their right toe is clamping the tool to the tool rest. Yeah, you'll see lots of videos of this, totally amazing. What incredible craftsmanship, and they're so fast. Yeah, But the advantage they've got there is they have torque going forward and backward. So they could be taking a cut, really going either direction. The Japanese, their tradition was also a reciprocating lathe, but in their tradition, they had basically an apprentice that would pull backwards and forwards. So it reciprocates going backwards and forwards, but they have power on both axes, which means their tradition developed so that they were actually developing cuts with the lathe running in what we would think of as reverse. So you see Japanese turners today, they often are running their lathe in reverse. So modern electric Japanese lathes are based on that strap system, but instead of having an apprentice, right, they have an electric motor and then basically two flywheels, two wheels inside, and a gearing system where they flop the belt from one wheel to the other, causing the whole thing to go in the other direction. So for a lot of them, they're actually working with it spinning away against that back wall, using hooks that look very similar to these, super close to these. When I turn, I'm often turning in reverse on an electric lathe. I don't know how common that is for all of you, but I do it all the time. It's super important when I'm doing an end grain cup like this. I'll run it in reverse and I'll present my gouge on that wall so that I can push down that wall. Because if I tried to do it with it running this way, I'd have to lean over too much, right? It's impossible. Or when I'm doing these locking lidded boxes, I have to create this retaining ledge here. And for me to do that, I got to run it reverse and do a push cut to get that little wedge shape. There are certain cuts where you will wrap your cord reverse to what I have it now, so that when I press down, it spins away from me. And then what I do, this is going to kill you, I work behind center. I literally can't see the blade. It is behind the mandrel. But I am pushing against that back wall, which is how in a pole lathe I can make the locking lidded boxes. I run this in reverse and I do a push cut behind the mandrel to create the ledge that I need to catch the lid. Yeah. So there's lots of ways to set up this return spring. Del Stubbs, I don't know if you guys know who Del Stubbs is, great turner, back in the 70s. There's shots of him in Sweden. He set up a car spring from the ceiling as his return spring. Hysterical. You can make these out of almost a bow-like material, so your uprights actually flex. I've seen that. Or they have bobbins that basically wind up this rope, and as you press down, that wind occurs, and the bobbin actually provides some of that return. You can also basically, instead of having this bungee here, you can actually have it on the side, which I have in one of my lathes. For low workshops like in a basement, you've got bungees over here and then a cantilevered arm that goes up and down. So this cord is attached directly to an arm that's going up and down, and the drive cords are being activated down here. A little bit less overhead, basically. So.
Are you able to do that?
No, when I'm hollowing right now, you'll see it in about 10 minutes. When I'm hollowing, my cut is going to be down here, and it's going to rise toward the core. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a valley kind of in the middle of this surface here. And then I'm going to cut down into the valley with that rising cut that I did on the base. And then I'm going to cut down into the valley from the inside, going the other direction with the same cut that I used for the nub. So it's this and that, and I'm burrowing down to create like a little cone. And then the very last thing I'll do is I will undercut that cone, snap it off, and that umbilical cord sort of broken and the bowl is born, so to speak. And then I just use a hook knife to clean up the nub and the scar in the middle, and you've got yourself a bowl. So, All right, so my first step is I'm going to resolve whatever I think my rim is going to be here. Got a little bit of flex. Yep, that's better. All right, so that is now the lip of the top of my bowl. Now I'm just going to clear out what's in the middle here, maybe use a different tool that's a little more beefy, like this big old hook. Can you see it?
A little bit. Yeah.
So the larger your mandrel, the more torque you would have, but the less speed you would have.
Correct. Yep. And you'll see, I get some pretty heavy cuts, you know, as opposed to more of a finishing cut. And I am getting some dust, especially with certain cuts, but for the most part, I'm actually cutting. I'm not just scraping away. All right, so now I've defined that plane going down into the valley, and now I'm going to flip the tool over, and I'm going to come down this face into that valley. Obviously, when I start, I'm in space, I got no bevel support, so I have to kind of get it started before I really get aggressive.
So does the timing come natural that when you're driving down with your foot that you feed in?
Yeah, after a while, you realize with the advantage of pulling back just very slightly on the up keeps you from catching sometimes. Got to establish a place for my bevel to sit, and then once it's there, I can dive in. Good. All right, I'm going to keep thinning this down till I get to a point where I'm pretty much ready to resolve my rim. Because I'm turning green, obviously this wood is actually very slightly ovalizing, and the more material I move here, it will start to go out of round especially with these fans on, by the end. So I kind of have to resolve that rim first and just not touch it. Oop, got a little catch there because it was an unsupported cut. There it is. Right here. Yeah, it's kind of spun. It's spun out here because I had an unsupported bevel right through there. And that's what I'm really trying to watch out for at this point. This is sort of the hardest, trickiest part. So I'm going to try to fix all this now. Okay. A little bit of tear out there. All right. Okay. So now the boring part, right? I just got to get myself kind of into the middle. There's a lot of examples in the historical record of folks who had houses next to turning shops and complained bitterly of the noise. Uh-oh. So, can you see what happened from your angle? Yeah? So I had a bad catch. I was trying to do a very aggressive cut, and it threw everything off kilter. Can you see how the bowl is now wobbling? So,
What's happening here? Did the tanks bend?
no, they pulled out a little bit. They just released just a little bit because I was doing too aggressive a cut.
We're at 10 and a little more forgiving.
That's exactly right. And I was, that'll just have to do. So hopefully no more cuts, no more catches. Like that one.
So your finished cuts are bevel roller cuts.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, generally yes. Anything where the bevel's not rubbing, I can get a catch. That's what I have to be most careful of. And creating small valleys where I can just get a little bevel purchase is important for the rim and a bunch of other types of cuts you do. Just trying to get to my final thickness for this first inch or so. All right, that'll do. Now I'm chasing the core down, making it a little bit more of a post rather than kind of a wedge. You'll notice I really want a lot of power and control so that I don't get a catch here, so I've tucked it under my arm. Now, one of the issues that I'm going to have with a straight tool, straight shafted tool like this, is as I get deeper and deeper into here, I run the risk of my tool touching the rim. So I've got to either come out way out here, or I work really well below center. If I work super well below center, I can sometimes get a cut going that will not touch the rim, but I'm now using the very top of this curl, that tippity tip bit right there, and you can get catches if you're not careful. And you see how I'm using the very top of that curl now? Right? But of course, if it's almost unsupported there. There's almost no bevel support, so it's going to want to get pulled. So I just have to be really mindful of that possibility. I pulse the tool a lot. Okay, good. I'm going to move my platform around a little bit so I can start using my other leg because my left leg's getting tired.
Is there anything like a parting tool where you can dive straight in and chew away that way?
Yes and no. There's tools designed for end grain cup turning, which effectively work in that fashion, and actually may cheat and use one. I've got one on my right here. It will allow me to kind of go in a little bit more at an angle. What you'll find me shift to pretty soon here is a bent tool, which will allow me to sneak around the rim and get down into the core. But I'm trying to get as much done with these and not rely too much on those, because sharpening them, they're very small hooks, sharpening them is gonna be a little hard for me today. Yeah, but parting tools I think is a great, what I'm getting now to is actually the hardest part, because that end grain, you're really coming at that end grain right into it. And so students often complain that coring is the hardest part. And it comes right at the end, of course, right? You're exhausted and now you've got to part it. So I'm just trying to thin this pillar, or this wedge, I should say, down into really a pillar shape, and then I'll eventually curl it in to about a 1/2 inch nub, and then I'll snap it off. And I have resolved pretty much everything up here. I'm not going to touch this again because it's going to start to move if I'm not careful. This is just jojoba oil from Lee Nielsen. It's one of these free giveaways. That was really just an excuse for me to stop pedaling for a while. All right, my bottom's still probably about a 1/2 inch thick.
You know, with most of us, we would have saved a lot of money if we got this approach.
Yeah,
Except for the knee surgery.
the knee surgery happened from running, please. Yeah, but yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it's like A couple of bucks and you got this thing. And you get your work out in, right? You'll notice here that I've got this cutting so far below center, and it's this rising cut that I'm doing here that feels so unnatural to what I'm used to on an electric lathe, where I might be doing something that's closer to like that motion. Here, I'm really doing that motion. Good, okay. Now I'm working literally behind the core. I actually can't see the blade right now, so I can get myself down in there. All right, in the interest of time, I'm gonna leave the bottom just a little bit thick, but because I want to get this thing done. All right, so now I'm gonna try to do some coring, reducing this wedge into kind of a reverse taper. Okay, good. All right. 45 minutes, maybe to an hour for a 6-inch bowl. Bigger bowls take much more time. But Robin Wood, who wrote that book, has a pretty famous video. It's, what is the story of that, that railroad worker who's like trying to beat the steam engine? John Henry. It's a John Henry moment. He and a guy in an electric lathe are in the middle of a field competing to make a 6-inch bowl. And the electric lathe guy had mounted a faceplate. So when he flipped, he's like pulling out all those screws. Whereas Robin's like flipped it around, put it in, kept trucking. The electric lathe guy beat him by about 30 seconds, but Robin's bowl was thinner. They cut it in half. Robin's bowl was easily thinner. That's at about the 6-inch size. But once you get bigger, it's a lot more work. And getting the control, like to do the mechanism for a locking lidded box is really hard, especially with this, with, you know, a little bit of movement. Oh, one thing I forgot to do, and maybe I'll pop it back on actually for a second before I snap it off. Burnishing for these greenwood pole lathe turn bowls is really common. Just to compress those fibers, because you'll notice it's a little bit of a rough finish in certain spots. Maybe you can sand it a little if you want, that's fine. I'm not against sanding, especially though I'd wait probably till it dries a little bit, and then I might hit it with like a 180 or 220 and then leave it at that. Here, let me pop it back on real quick and I'll pass it around after I burnish it. Normally, you'll have like a lot of shavings that are dry, but wet shavings will work okay. Burnish, yeah, I'm just compressing. It's funny, in greenwood circles, sanding is like the devil's toilet paper. It's like you don't, I'm not that averse to it, but in certain circles, it's like verboten. Yeah, walnut's hard in general. I'm like, no offense. It's hard in the tools. With the shavings? The silica on the walnut would be great. I think it would actually work pretty well as a burnishing tool. Yeah, certain woods sort of finish better than others. Now, one thing that, because I was burnishing a lot, I worked out with is I got in touch with a broom maker and made poulissoir. He made these are used in furniture making circles, and I'm not sure if you guys have run across these. In the French tradition, they use a broom handle, sort of broom corn, to compress the fibers. They'll wax the surface on like a shelf or something, and then they'll do this, compressing the fibers and creating the most beautiful surfaces you've ever seen. Straight off the plane, little wax, this, but with a flat end instead of a rounded end. So I had a broom maker make me one for bowls, and it works great. I wish the handle was a little bit longer. Like, this is like 16th century French technology. And it's not long enough really for me to get on the sides, but I can kind of get into the base. All right, I think it is what it is. All right, here it is. So I'm looking for the end grain. End grain is sort of, the grain's going this direction, and I'm basically gonna pull it across the short grain. So the grain is now going up and down. And you just sort of grab it right here and grab the bowl and just give a good pop. Ready? Here we go. And a bowl is born. So, and then just got to remove that little device. Usually just a good whack with a hatchet. We'll take that right off for you. And then you clean up the bottom with some delicate axe work. Yeah, you guys were asking me about axe work. This is where it all goes terribly wrong, right? Yeah, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to find an edge of my chopping block that's still got an edge to it. I'm going to work across the grain so the grain's running that direction. Rest it on the side here. Obviously, I'm using my finger on the side of the blade, tucking my fingers right behind it so I got a lot of control. Yeah, that's probably good enough. And then the rest of that nub I'll take out with a spoon knife, a hooked knife that I use for spoon carving that looks like this. Classic for spoon carving. You know, I'll basically pull that out like that, and then I'll clean up the inside like that, and the bowl's done. Let it dry. So drying for green wood, I'm sure you've all done once turn bowls. Like the best system that I've come up with is I'll wrap it in a clean shirt or a cloth or a towel. Next day, come back and just swap it out for a dry, clean cloth. Do that for about a week, week and a half, and I use a moisture reader. Once this comes down to about 14%, you're usually pretty good. You'll see it ovalize, you'll see it cup a little bit, and when you hold it to your lips, it won't feel cold. Once you hit that spot, it's usually pretty stable, and then you can just leave it on a shelf in your workshop and just kind of let it percolate for a while. Finishes that I use, traditionally these sorts of bowls would be finished with like a linseed or a tongue or a walnut, something that's a polymerizing oil, something that actually hardens, food safe. When I say linseed, by the way, I'm not talking about boiled linseed, which has chemicals in it that you probably don't, they're supposed to volatilize out, but I use food grade flax oil. Linseed and flax are the same thing. So a lot of those bowls are finished with a linseed or a linseed beeswax mix. When I do end grain cups, they are especially tricky because those fibers on the end grain can just pull moisture like crazy, and these will split in a heartbeat if you're not careful. And I find even polymerizing oils don't really tackle this. Even if you leave a really thick base, you can break these open a lot if you just use an oil. So this one has been finished with a Japanese product that is colloquially known as liquid glass. It's called Hasui. It's food safe and actually is not a nano coating. It actually penetrates and bonds with the wood First coat goes on really thick, like it just soaks right in. But that silica is bonding with the wood and creates a watertight, food-safe surface that is perfect for end grain cups. There's only one distributor in the United States that I know of today. That's Jared Dahl out in Wisconsin. So that is another surface that I'm definitely working a lot with, especially for end grain. And then finally, I've gone down the rabbit hole with Japanese finishes, and I'm now doing urushi. Urushi is a lacquer tradition that goes back about 9,000 years. It is a lacquer that is made from the sap of the urushi tree. The urushi tree is related to what we have here: poison oak, poison ivy, poison sumac. Urushiol is that compound that causes the dermatitis that gives you those blistering. But when it fully cures, it creates what I would argue is the very best food-safe surface for food items, for woodenware that you're going to use every day, period. It is impervious to alcohol, acids, alkali, hot liquids just below boiling. It imparts no taste from one meal to the next. Like you can throw your coffee in one moment and milk in the next, and you won't taste the coffee. It does not like UV rays, so keep it out of the sun. And if you really want to get into it, there's a lot of PPE concerns because you can give yourself pretty awful rashes if you're not really careful with how you're managing it. The process for applying this stuff is time intensive. There are 5 coats of urushi on this. The first coat goes on, then I wait 7 days for it to cure. Second coat, wait 3 days. Third coat, wait 3 days. Fourth coat, 3 days. Fifth coat, 3 days. And then it has to sit in my curing cabinet for a full month. So it's literally 7 to 8 weeks before a finished product is finally done. But it's gorgeous.
Liquid form and
Yeah.
fit on?
Yep. It comes in like a little painter's tube. And you basically, what this is, the technique I'm using here is called fuki urushi, which is wiping urushi. So I paint it on in a very light coat, let it sit for 5 minutes, and then I'm actually taking a cloth, lint-free cloth, and I'm wiping it off. It's the easiest, honestly, the way to do this. There's literally thousands of traditions of how to do this. But, and you have to, if you're gonna have it cure, it doesn't dry. It actually chemically bonds with moisture in the air. So what you have to do is create a dust-free cabinet that actually has a source of humidity and temperature control. It wants a certain humidity level and a certain temperature level. So I've got basically an old kitchen cabinet with a ceramic bulb to get my temperature going, hooked to a thermostat, and then trays of water to get my humidity levels up. And I've got a hydrometer that tells me what my humidity level is. And then I can set these things in. It sounds insane, doesn't it? Well, what the fuck are you doing? Oh, and by the way, like a very small number of people are still allergic to this even after it's cured. I mean, it's safe for me, but I have heard of like GIs who went to Japan and sat down on a nice toilet seat that was lacquered. Yeah, so I probably do 10 or 20 at a time.
What do you use for the PPE?
Good question. I use nitrite-free gloves, the really nice ones. Oh, what are they called? Venom steel. They're more expensive, but you do not want them breaking. Good and thick, definitely it's not going to break. Then I use just a long sleeve shirt. The first layer that you put on for this, actually you mix with a little bit of turpentine. It's what the Japanese call the strengthening layer. So it's about 50-50 urushi and turpentine. You paint that on and it penetrates pretty deeply. But that, of course, raises the grain a little bit. So after curing for 7 days, you come back to it and you're supposed to sand it at that level at about 400 grit. But you can imagine like a dry sand would be the most dangerous thing in the world. Like you do not want that dust. So wet sand only. I wear glasses obviously when I'm working, but I don't use a face shield. I haven't had that problem. It's not like the stuff splatters. You got a lot of control. You watch artisans on videos in Japan, urushi artisans, and they're barehanded. And they've got a furo, a curing cabinet that's like 6 foot by 6 foot. And they're just pulling out racks of these rice bowls and just bang, 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 bang. And this is all they do. Like it is an occupation just to be an urushi artist. And it's highly valued. Most of the people that gravitate toward it already have some sort of resistance to the dermatitis.
They do paintings too, right?
Yeah, they do. Gold leaf, and they etch, and they do. That's actually the hardest part I've found getting into urushi is each of the Japanese villages had their own secret tradition, their own way of doing it. So there's no like one way. It was very hard to get in because there really wasn't any agreement on what to do. So, and the videos are terrible. The videos are just awful online. Other finishes that I do experiment with, I do a lot of scorching these days, just with a little plumber's torch. And once you kind of burn off one layer of the wood, you're left with lignin. And that lignin layer is super resistant to water, tastes. It washes up really, really nicely. Like this Pole Lathe turned cup I made, I don't know how long ago. I don't have a date on it, but I scorched the inside of this and it's just a great coffee cup. Washes up really smooth, doesn't transfer, tastes, completely water resistant. So I can put boiling water in this and it won't care. Yeah, so that's been fun too. That's another Japanese tradition.
Over the after you burnt it? Or
Say again?
is there something over the burning?
Linseed, pretty sure linseed oil. Yeah. Yeah. Questions? I think that's it.
Milk paint?
Milk paint, I do a lot with milk paint. The milk paint that I really tend to use most is from the Real Milk Paint Company. They've been very supportive of my work in the past, and I do get a small deal. If you guys want to buy milk paint, if you punch in the code goodson-woodcraft.10, you'll get 10% off. I get a small kickback. But I like their range of colors. I like the way their paint handles. The old-fashioned milk paint company does make beautiful stuff. Their color range is old-fashioned, very colonial. Its open time is relatively short. It tends to gel up really quick. So with milk paint, you can use it very lightly and almost make a wash when you mix it it comes in a powder. When you mix it with water, you can put it on so that you get a little bit of the grain kind of coming through, or you can use it heavier. With Pole Lathe turn pieces, I tend to layer different colors because it accentuates those tool marks, which I find charming. Burnishing is really important, I think, for milk paint. Not enough people know about burnishing. Or lightly sanding. After. So milk paint will go on, it'll look dry pretty quick. I'd let the first coat dry for a full day, even if it looks dry after an hour. It's like concrete. It actually gets harder over time. So then you can put on other paints, but other layers. I do recommend sanding it back a little bit because the powder has a little bit of a tooth to it. Also burnishing with like a brown paper bag works really well. Will actually create a very nicely polished surface that has a lot of complexity to it, almost a different set of colors. And then when you oil it, it goes much darker. When you shellac it, it's a little less dark. You'll have to.
You definitely have to put a finish over the whole thing.
No, you don't have to. You don't have to. You want to let it really set before you sell it to someone or give it to someone. Otherwise, the paint can rub off if it really hasn't set. But after years of use, It's tough. Like once it really sets, it's a very robust paint.
Set like a month or so?
A couple weeks will do it. Yeah, a couple weeks will do it. It's the same time it would take to like polymerize oil. So I'll finish it, sand it, I'll oil it, I'll put it away for a couple weeks, and then the oil will polymerize and the subcoat of paint will have really set. And then it's pretty safe to drag across your kitchen table and not get a streak of plum color.
So like the one with the handle on, you can sand it back to get a crisp edge,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's been sanded with like maybe 320 or 220. That was electric lathe turned. That was done, I don't know, a week or two ago. Yeah, the milk paints are, I think one of the interesting things about milk paint is different colors require different amounts of water to meet the same consistency that you're looking for. It seems like the darker colors need a little more water somehow. I'm not sure why that is. Mixing milk paint is somewhat of an art. You really want it smooth and creamy. It tends to want to froth a little bit, almost bubble. And so they actually sell an anti-foaming agent, which I think is literally just dish soap. I'm not sure. But one drop in like a little ball jar that you're mixing up and does the trick. It cuts down on those bubbles, breaks that surface tension, then you get a real thin coat. I was talking to, was it Peter Galbert? No, it was Buchanan, a chair maker. Chair makers use milk paint all the time. Like their classic is a red base with a black on top that they then rub back. Like that's classic Windsor chair making stuff. What he used to do is he would literally, Buchanan pours off the top like half an inch, like just throws it away because he finds the stuff right at the bottom is the creamiest, the smoothest. I've found that if you bring a little modern technology to it, you can get really creamy results. If you've ever taken like a science class, like in your chemistry class, have you seen these mechanical stirrers? Like a little magnet that basically, you drop a magnet into your ball jar. It looks like a lozenge almost. You set it on this base. The base has a magnet that's spinning inside of it, and it spins that piece of metal, and then you just like go have lunch. And you come back and you've got just gorgeous. And they're like 25 bucks, 30 bucks.
I see one on Instagram.
Yeah, those are great. I really, really like that for mixing milk paint. I've also found, by the way, milk paint packs in its powdered form. So just like a baker, you don't want to measure by volume. I highly recommend measuring by weight. So a little food scale is what I use to measure the milk paint. And then just keep notes, like the Caribbean blue really likes a 2-to-1 ratio, but the parchment white really likes a 1-to-1 ratio. You just kind of got to keep notes for each color and figure out what works best for the results you're kind of looking for. Yeah.
Who's the liquid glass distributor?
Jared Dahl, D-A-H-L. If you go online and look for Wood Spirit Handcraft. Wood Spirit Handcraft. It is pricey stuff, but you would be amazed at how far it goes. So I bought a very large container that probably cost me $200. But I can use a 4-ounce container and get about 15 cups out of it, just out of a little 4-ounce container. So a big one like that, you have to keep it closed. Like literally, if this is a riot, like you pour off just what you're gonna use. You never pour back what you haven't used. So you're gonna use it all into like a little cup. But if I leave that cup with a little bit of liquid glass in there overnight and come back the next day, there's a little puddle of solid glass sitting in the bottom of the cup. It's wild stuff. It is wild stuff. It's called Hasui, H-A-S-S-U-I. You have to let it sit for 20 days. So for Hasui, you paint on one coat, wait 5 minutes, paint on a second coat, have at it. You could sand between layers if you really didn't want that raised grain. I would recommend it for end grain cups, wait a full day and do that third coat. Then you have to let it sit for 20 days before it's food safe.
Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, guys. Yeah. Feel free to reach out if you guys have any follow-up questions. My cards are on the table.